Joining us now, Senator Angus King of Maine. He's a member of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. Senator, we've covered this before. You believe the filibuster should be put aside for federal voting rights legislation. Is that still your view, and do you think that's where this is heading?
Well, when you say put aside, there are lots of options. It's not all or nothing, Nicole. There are opportunities to modify the rule, to require the opposition to be there, to require actual speaking on the floor. So I think there are some options. But I think it ought to be emphasized what we're talking about. We're being filibustered tomorrow to even bring the bill to the floor. In other words, people talk about the filibuster facilitating debate. This is the filibuster being used to stifle debate, which is really kind of ridiculous when you think about it. They're filibustering tomorrow something called the motion to proceed, which is just to bring the bill to the floor. If we have a debate on the bill and they don't like it, then there's an option to filibuster at the end of the process. But that just underlines that, there's just no interest, as the Post headline you mentioned said, there's no interest in finding a solution to this. As David Jolly said, this seems to be the strategy. I always thought the way to win elections is to have better candidates and better ideas. This seems to be the way to win elections is to keep people you don't like from voting.
So you just, not that I needed it, but you just made the filibuster sound even more obstructive and heinous than I already think it is. Why are Democrats not united in filibuster reform to preserve the right to vote, to preserve the right to have votes counted? This is the Republican strategy, and I don't believe that you're actually surprised that Republicans don't want anything to do with voting rights legislation, are you?
I'm not surprised. No, I'm not surprised because there really hasn't been any outreach. The compromise bill that we worked out over the summer has been around for more than a month. Nobody's come forward with a counter proposal or, hey, we could maybe do this. The reservation, Nicole, is that this is a double-edged sword. Right now, the filibuster is being used to obstruct. It could be used in the future to deconstruct important legislation, and there would be no defense. The way I put it is, today's annoying obstruction can be tomorrow's precious shield. So all of us are conscious, I certainly am, about the fact that anything we do sets the precedent that can be turned around and used against interests that those of us hold dear, whether it's voting rights, the Affordable Care Act, Social Security, Medicare, you name it. The defenses are down once we make this change. On the other hand, I've concluded that democracy itself is more important than any Senate rule. And I think that we ought to be able to find some way to satisfy those who are committed to the idea of the filibuster, bipartisanship, requiring minority engagement, that we can find a path that will satisfy them, but at the same time allow us to move forward. The filibuster used to be used, once every 5 years. And now it's everything. I mean, we're having to overcome filibusters on deputy secretaries of defense. Everything we do is subject to this obstruction, and it's not what the framers had in mind. The framers knew fractions. They understood. They in the Constitution, there are places where they required 2/3. They debated at the founding convention about whether there should be a supermajority requirement for the passage of legislation and decided not to. And here's what's really shocking, Nicole. I did the math the other day. You can assemble 41 votes in the Senate to stop anything. And those senators, those 41 senators, represent 24% of America. So 24% of Americans can basically veto anything that's important and desired by 76% of Americans. To me, that doesn't square with any theory of the way the democracy is supposed to work.
Senator, I want to push respectfully on something you said, because I think you said out loud something that senators have said to me privately, that some of the preciousness of the filibuster is this concern about how it could shield you should you be in the minority again. Do you really still believe that? Do you really think the filibuster would shield you from Mitch McConnell, 2021's Mitch McConnell, should you be in a slim minority?
That's a fair question. Only, I mean, the only evidence we have is past actions. And for 4 years, President Trump hammered on Mitch McConnell to eliminate the filibuster so they could do whatever they wanted, and he didn't do it. I do think in the Republican caucus there are those who are committed to the filibuster as an institutional principle. So, yeah, I understand that's a risk. If they take the majority in 2 years or a year or 4 years or whatever it is, it's certainly a risk that they could make that change. And that's one of the factors that has to be weighed. But Nicole, I think the discussion you had with David Jolly and Jonathan Lemire was really important because we're talking about a fragile democracy. A representative democracy is an anomaly in world history. Most countries for thousands of years have been run by dictators, pharaohs, czars, kings, you name it. And what we have is unusual and it's fragile. And I don't think we Americans really realize how fragile it is. And what happened last winter was a close call. If it hadn't been for a few public officials, almost all Republicans, by the way, like Raffensperger in Georgia, Mike Pence, a Republican certifier of elections in Michigan, if it hadn't been for those people, Lord knows what would have happened. People talk lightly about a constitutional crisis. It would have been a serious crisis. We had a close call last winter, and that's why this Voting Rights Act and clarifying some of these things that are going on in the states and limiting them is so important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, look, and I, like you, am an independent who votes for the Democrats. I have voted straight party line, not over a single policy, but over the preservation of our democracy. And I worry about your side. I worry about the Democratic Party, who right now controls the House, controls the Senate, controls the White House, and seems like a deer on a frozen pond about what to do about the filibuster when it comes to federal voting rights legislation. And I hear your conviction of purpose, but I do not hear a strategy for getting the bill through the Senate. Is there one that has consensus?
There is not one that has consensus. There is a lot of discussion going on about how could the rule be modified that would maintain the protections for the minority, and that's really what it's all about, at the same time not be a tool of just stone cold obstruction. And there are those discussions going on. Jeff Merkley, for example, from Oregon, has done a huge amount of research about what we call the talking filibuster, just requiring people to come. Most members of the public, when they hear the word filibuster, they think we're talking about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and people talking all night. That's gone now. You can phone it in. And it's just too easy. We're talking, I believe what we ought to be talking about is restoring the Senate to what it once was, where the minority views are protected and you get bipartisanship, but not enabling, as I say, stone cold obstruction. And by the way, what's going on in these states is in no way bipartisan. I mean, it would be ironic if we failed to act here in the name of seeking bipartisanship, and you're then enabling straight up partisan actions in the states to restrict voting rights, and they're even talking about changing their rules so that a state legislature could override the voters of the state and send their own preferred set of electors to Washington in the Electoral College. I mean, talk about finagling the mechanics of our electoral system. That's it, times 10.
Well, I mean, that is the perfect point to end on. The only people who make the Republicans in Washington look halfway decent are the Republicans out in the state, and power grab is too kind to articulate what they're doing. They're destroying democracy, one voter suppression, voter nullification bill at a time. We focus on Texas. Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game from Georgia because their bill was so bad. But you have a remedy. I mean, federal legislation usurps a lot of that. Is that on your minds? Are people fluent and concerned about what's happening out in the states, Senator, as this goes into this crucial week?
Yes, and I wish I could tell you that, it's going to be A, B, C, D. I can't tell you that, and because there are members of the Democratic caucus who are very concerned, and I've been one of them, about undoing the filibuster on policy matters. But to me, this is a whole different category. And if I have to choose between democracy and a Senate rule, that's a pretty easy call, I think. And even understanding that it could come back to bite us, it could come back to bite me on something that I'm deeply concerned about in the future. But I think this issue is so transcendent that it deserves a solution, because otherwise, we're sunk. This democracy is fragile and it's under attack, and it's our fundamental responsibility as members to preserve and defend the Constitution of the United States. And right now, it's in doubt.
I want to single you out for praise for your candor, for telling me where you are, not trying to make it sound like there's a plan to get from A to Z. And I would ask you to keep coming back, keep letting us know how this is going, because I agree with you. I don't know that there's anything more important than legislation to protect our democracy from what's happening out in the states. Senator Angus King, thank you so much for spending some time with us on this today.
Thank you, Nicole. Great to be with you.